Noah Schnapp has opened up about the psychological toll of playing Will Byers, a character subjected to prolonged fear, possession, and isolation starting when Schnapp was just 11 years old. He said that repeatedly filming scenes of terror and helplessness made it difficult to separate himself emotionally from the character, particularly during the earlier seasons when he was still developing emotionally. He later acknowledged that much of his early work required him to access fear and distress far beyond what most children experience at that age. But let's be honest, the real morbid fact here is that bowl cut. My God, they did him dirty. Caleb McLaughlin and Pryor Ferguson have both stated that becoming famous as children on Stranger Things exposed them to racist harassment from fans. They've said some of the harassment even escalated to messages threatening violence, including death threats, even when they were still just children. Maya Hawke has said her childhood unfolded under the shadow of a very public family collapse after her father Ethan Hawke had an affair with the family nanny, an event she's described as shattering her sense of stability. She grew up amid the fallout of that breakup, which she's linked to long-term anxiety and feelings of abandonment. As a child, Maya also struggled with severe dyslexia, falling so behind academically that she was eventually pulled out of school because she couldn't read at the expected level, leaving her isolated during years when structure and security were already unraveling. Before he became famous, Vanilla Ice claims he survived a brutal stabbing and a near-fatal nightclub attack. When he was 16, he got caught in the middle of a gang fight in South Dallas and was stabbed 5 times, one wound narrowly missing his heart. Doctors reportedly said the blade came so close that another half-inch would have killed him. Months later, he was nearly beaten to death outside a club after a show, leaving him with permanent nerve damage in his arm. This doll belonging to a 5-year-old girl has been watching over her gravesite since her death in 1912. In April of 2001, 20-year-old Branson Perry completely vanished from his father's home in Skidmore, Missouri. He told a friend he was stepping outside to put a pair of jumper cables into the shed, but was never seen again. His van, wallet, and all personal belongings were left behind. Despite searches, interviews, and 2 decades of investigation, no remains have ever been found and no one has ever been charged. To this day, Branson Perry's disappearance remains one of Missouri's most haunting unsolved cases. On Christmas Eve in 2008, 45-year-old Bruce Jeffrey Pardo arrived at his ex-wife's house in California wearing a Santa Claus suit and carrying multiple firearms. When the front door was opened by an 8-year-old girl, he shot her in the face before opening fire at a crowded family Christmas party. Bruce then unleashed a homemade fuel dispensing device hidden inside a wrapped present, igniting a massive fire that trapped victims inside as the house burned. 9 people were killed, some by gunfire, and others burned so badly that it took investigators several days to identify them. The fire burned so intensely that parts of Bruce's Santa suit melted onto his skin, forcing him to flee while still on fire. He later drove to his brother's house, where he turned the gun on himself. Investigators later determined the attack was driven by rage over a recent divorce, mounting financial pressure after losing his job, and a bitter custody dispute, with Bruce specifically targeting his ex-wife and her family. Police discovered that he'd spent months preparing, stockpiling weapons, booby-trapping vehicles with explosives, and compiling a list of additional targets, including his ex-wife's divorce attorney, making the attack one of the most disturbing holiday massacres in U.S. history. Before fame, Charlie Heaton lived in a dangerous squat in London while touring with the noise punk band. He's talked about waking up to overdoses in the building, sleeping on floors, surviving on almost no money, and performing in violent clubs where fights routinely broke out. In 2017, he was detained at LAX for cocaine traces in his luggage and temporarily barred from entering the U.S. Carol Buono's childhood was marked by a near-fatal accident that almost killed her decades before she ever appeared on Stranger Things. At 11 years old, she was struck by a speeding car while walking home in New York, suffering severe injuries and head trauma that required long-term recovery and left her with memory gaps from that entire year of her life. Finn Wolfhard has dealt with disturbing stalking-level behavior since he was barely a teenager. At 14, he said grown adults were waiting outside of his hotel rooms, following him to filming locations, and even tracking down where his family lived, forcing security to intervene more than once. In one of the creepier incidents he's discussed publicly, a group of adult fans learned his exact shooting schedule and routinely appeared wherever he was working, standing silently across the street, something he said made him feel hunted. During World War II, Nazi SS units carried out one of the regime's most disturbing programs, the mass kidnapping of up to 200,000 Polish children for forced Germanization. After being taken from their families, the children were sent to SS-run children's education camps where they were subjected to horrific racial selection exams. SS doctors measured their skulls, noses, eye colors, and body proportions, trying to determine whether each child looked Aryan enough to be turned into a German. If a child passed the test, they were renamed, stripped of their identity, and adopted into German families as if they'd never been Polish at all. But if they failed, their fate was much darker. Many were transported to concentration camps, where countless children died from starvation, disease, abuse, or execution. Only an estimated 10 to 15% of the kidnapped children were ever found and returned to Poland after the war. At the Nuremberg trials, the Allies confirmed the program a form of genocide, the deliberate attempt to erase an entire population by stealing and remaking their children. This was the moment when an off-duty police officer in Barcelona realized something was seriously wrong at a subway station. A young man on the platform appeared disoriented and unsteady, drifting dangerously close to the edge in a station where trains arrive every few minutes. The officer, later identified as Felisa Pozas, was off-duty but immediately recognized the risk. She walked to an emergency SOS intercom and pressed the button to alert Metro Control that someone needed help. But seconds later, the situation escalated as the man suddenly lost his balance and fell onto the tracks below. Without hesitating, Pozas ran toward him as several nearby commuters rushed in to help. Working against the clock, they grabbed him and hoisted him back onto the platform, knowing a train could enter the station at any moment. No one was seriously injured, and authorities later confirmed the man was not intoxicated. No further details about his condition have been released, but officials say the outcome could have easily been fatal if not for Pozas' awareness, her decision to act immediately, and the fact that she didn't wait for someone else to step in. Victoria Wright was born with cherubism, a rare genetic disorder that causes the bones in the lower face to grow erratically, giving her a swollen, distorted appearance that drew cruel comments from strangers her entire life. The condition can be extremely painful by tightening the jaw, straining the facial nerves, and making basic things like chewing or even speaking very difficult at times. As a child, she endured constant looks, bullying, and even adults snickering about her in public as if she wasn't standing right there. But instead of hiding, she turned her diagnosis into a mission, calling out the cruelty she faced after a BBC documentary sparked a wave of online abuse, and becoming a fierce advocate for people with facial differences. In 2015, Mary Cerruti vanished from her Houston bungalow without a trace. 2 years later, the new owners found her skeletal remains sealed inside a wall along with her glasses and shoes. Investigators believe she fell through the attic floor and became trapped, slowly dying alone in total darkness with no way of climbing out. But because she was one of the last homeowners refusing to sell as developers closed in around her, many people still suspect something darker. Her official cause of death remains undetermined. Jeff Garcia, best known for being the voice of Sheen in Jimmy Neutron, died on December 10, 2025 at age 50 after a terrible chain of medical emergencies that began months earlier. He first suffered a brain aneurysm that caused him to collapse and hit his head, then later endured a stroke that left his health severely weakened. After a bout of pneumonia and repeated hospital visits for trouble breathing, Jeff's condition crashed when one of his lungs suddenly collapsed, forcing doctors to place him on life support. His family ultimately made the decision to pull the plug, ending a rapid decline that left fans stunned. That same day, veteran voice actor Jim Ward, who played Doug Dimmadome, owner of the Dimsdale Dimmadome, and dozens of other roles, died at 66 after years of complications with advanced Alzheimer's disease. Ward had already retired from voice work several years earlier as the disease progressed, losing his ability to continue performing before eventually requiring long-term care. According to his wife, the disease steadily deteriorated his health until his death on December 11, 2025. Together, their deaths marked the losses of two of the most iconic voices of Nickelodeon cartoons. In October of 2024, Micah Smith took his 3 young children, ages 2, 4, and 8, on a 9-mile hike in Utah that authorities described as extremely difficult and dangerous, especially as a major storm was rolling in. Court records say Smith failed to check the weather and continued climbing, even after sending photos of the incoming storm to his wife, who urged him to turn back. Investigators say he refused, later telling police he was comfortable hiking in the dark without lights. By the time they reached the summit around 6 p.m., hail and snow had started falling. The family began descending, but only made it about 600 feet before one child fell and struck their head. At that point, Smith decided to shelter in place overnight with the children, despite worsening weather and inadequate clothing. During the night, prosecutors say the children repeatedly said they were cold, exhausted, and wanted to go home. One child allegedly begged Smith to turn back earlier, saying she was afraid she might not survive, but he refused, calling the hike a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Court documents state Smith later claimed he performed CPR on his son overnight and instructed his daughter to continue the CPR before leaving his children behind. When search and rescue teams located Smith the next day, he was all alone and appeared completely unconcerned about his kids, telling responders he believed one of his children was already dead. A helicopter crew later found the 3 children together, severely hypothermic and inadequately clothed. All 3 children ultimately survived, though 2 were in critical condition, and 1 had a core body temperature of 63 degrees Fahrenheit that led to a stroke and emergency brain surgery. Smith was later charged with aggravated child abuse and child torture, with prosecutors requesting no bail, arguing he repeatedly chose to continue, despite warnings from the children, their mother, and the worsening weather. YouTube prankster Vitaly rose to fame in the early 2010s for viral public stunts built around shock, confrontation, and pushing social boundaries. But as his platform grew, those stunts increasingly crossed into real-world violence. In 2014, he was arrested in Miami after physically attacking a woman in what he called a prank. Years later, Vitaly admitted he was high on psychedelic mushrooms when he punched another woman in the face, a completely unprovoked assault that left her with serious facial injuries requiring hospitalization. In 2016, he escalated further by carrying out a bomb hoax at LAX that caused mass panic and resulted in criminal convictions. In 2022, he was detained again after running onto the field during the FIFA World Cup in Qatar, interrupting a live international match and being forcibly removed by security. Afterward, Vitaly's behavior only continued to deteriorate, culminating in his arrests in the Philippines in April of 2025 after a series of live-streamed incidents in Manila where he was filmed harassing mall security guards, confronting random civilians, trespassing on private property, and allegedly stealing a security guard's phone during an altercation. Philippine authorities classified the conduct as harassment, theft, and public disorder, charging him with various offenses including unjust vexation. He's currently detained at a jail facility in Taguig while awaiting trial, and has not been deported after both the United States and Russia declined to accept him. Vitaly has already spent around 8 months in pretrial detention, and if convicted, he faces up to 18 months in a Philippine prison, following a steady escalation from viral stunts to criminal charges. This was the moment an American tourist realized she was in serious danger. While riding the Rail Runner mountain coaster in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, 2 adult black bears stepped almost directly onto the track in front of her. The coaster cannot be steered, stopped, or exited, leaving her a sitting duck as the bears stared her down from just a few feet away. But she was extremely lucky the bears showed curiosity rather than aggression, a common response when black bears don't feel threatened or have become accustomed to human activity. Wildlife officials later warned the situation could have turned fatal in seconds if the bears had reacted differently. Here's a video of a man playing with a blue-ringed octopus, completely oblivious that he's handling one of the most lethal animals on the planet. The tiny octopus contains tetrodotoxin, a venom powerful enough to kill an adult human within minutes, causing total paralysis while leaving the victim fully conscious and aware of what's happening. A single bite can shut down the lungs, stopping breathing as the body becomes unable to move or cry for help. There's no antidote, and survival depends entirely on immediate artificial ventilation until the toxin wears off. Even worse, blue-ringed octopuses often bite painlessly, meaning the man wouldn't even realize he's been bitten until his muscles begin to fail. Here's a photo of what can happen when a hair dye allergy goes catastrophically wrong. This young woman suffered a violent reaction to PPD, a chemical found in most at-home dye kits, and within hours her forehead began swelling so fast it nearly doubled in size. The reaction triggered angioedema, a dangerous buildup of fluid that pooled around her eyes and scalp, warping the shape of her head and leaving one eye almost swollen shut. Doctors warn that reactions like this can escalate to throat swelling and suffocation if left untreated, and that once your body reacts to PPD, even a tiny exposure in the future can set off something even worse. In Hangzhou, China, visitors can find 2 iron statues permanently forced to kneel, Qin Hui and his wife Wang. They were the officials blamed for framing and executing the national hero Yu Fei in 1142. For nearly 900 years, visitors have treated the figures as if they were still alive and deserving punishment, spitting on them and smacking their heads in a ritual of public contempt. The hatred ran so deep that locals had to keep rebuilding the statues multiple times because people kept destroying them, turning these kneeling effigies into one of the longest-running acts of symbolic vengeance in history. Here's some incredible footage of a black tiger marking its territory, one of the rarest big cat mutations on Earth. These so-called black tigers aren't truly melanistic, but carry a genetic glitch that thickens their stripes and darkens their coat until they look almost entirely black. Only a handful of them have ever been documented, nearly all from India's Similipal Tiger Reserve for reasons unknown to researchers across the world. Seeing a rhino with its full horn intact is becoming increasingly rare due to poaching. So many rhinos have been killed for their horns that conservation teams now remove them preemptively, making a full-grown one extremely uncommon. This colorized footage of Jerusalem in 1897 is the closest thing we have to a working time machine. This rarely seen deep-sea creature known as an oarfish washed ashore in Mexico earlier this year. Oarfish normally live thousands of feet beneath the surface and can grow up to 30 feet long, which is why their sudden beachings have fueled legends across the world for centuries. Their serpent-like bodies have inspired old nautical tales of sea monsters, and in Japan they're known as messengers from the sea god believed to appear before major disasters. Here's some insane footage of a domestic cat that's reached an astounding age of 29 years, the rough human equivalent of someone in their late 130s. Most house cats live 12 to 15 years, and even reaching 20 is rare. Cats that make it this far are often born with unusually resistant genetics that slow age-related organ failure, especially in the kidneys and heart, and that advantage is typically reinforced by consistent care in a low-stress environment. A doorbell cam caught this bird appearing to float in midair because the camera's frame rate synced perfectly with its wings. Each time the camera captured a frame, the bird's wings were in the exact same position, creating the illusion that it was suspended motionless above the driveway. In January of 2020, Storm Gloria completely battered the coast of Spain, whipping seawater rich in organic material into massive clouds of sea foam. Powerful winds blew the foam inland, piling it waist-high through the streets and swallowing storefronts, cars, and people. The surreal scenes were a side effect of a storm that also caused deadly flooding, widespread destruction, and multiple fatalities across the country. Grace Van Dien, aka Chrissy, revealed that she was groomed by a producer while working on another project, an experience she said left her traumatized enough to step away from acting entirely. She described it as one of the darkest times of her life, saying Hollywood had become unsafe for her and that the incident permanently changed how she views the industry. Before Stranger Things, Brett Gelman endured years of darkness, losing his younger brother in a sudden tragedy, spiraling through severe depression, and battling suicidal thoughts while he struggled to afford rent and avoid homelessness. He says he was quietly blacklisted in Hollywood for speaking out against abusive workplaces, leaving him convinced his career would be over before it ever started. Mark Steger, the performer inside the Demogorgon suit, has said the role was one of the most physically dangerous of his career. The practical suit trapped extreme heat, restricted movement, and weighed so much that he repeatedly suffered heat exhaustion, ligament strain, and even collapsed during takes. At one point, he collapsed so fast the crew thought he'd gone into cardiac arrest. Steger said the Demogorgon required total body endurance just to survive filming days. Before playing Vecna, Jamie Campbell Bower spiraled into heroin addiction and said he was 1 week away from dying. He's talked about waking up in places he didn't remember, overdosing, and losing control of his life. He eventually entered rehab, got sober, and described the experience as surviving the darkest years of his life. Before Stranger Things made him famous, Joe Keery survived a serious car accident that easily could have killed him. The car flipped and was completely wrecked, and he later said he only walked away because the airbags deployed at the exact right moment. The crash left him shaken for years, realizing how close he'd come to death before anyone knew his name. Gaten Matarazzo was born with cleidocranial dysplasia, a condition so rare it affects less than 1 in a million people. It left him without collarbones, caused severe skull and dental abnormalities, and forced him into repeated surgeries to expose impacted teeth and install prosthetics. The condition itself can cause brittle bones, dangerous airway problems, and lifelong complications. Before Stranger Things, he was rejected from audition after audition for his appearance, but the show ultimately wrote his real disorder into Dustin's character, and Gaten now uses his platform to raise awareness for those living with CCD. When Disney casted Tim Allen as the Santa Claus in 1994, the studio quietly broke its own rule against hiring ex-convicts. Back in 1978, he was arrested at the airport while trying to smuggle more than a pound of cocaine and faced a possible life sentence before cutting a deal to inform on other dealers. He spent over 2 years in federal prison, getting out in 1981, then spent the next decade rebuilding his career until Home Improvement turned him into a star in 1991. So by the time Disney handed him the lead role in The Santa Claus, they were making one of the rarest casting exceptions in company history, turning a former federal prisoner into the face of Christmas. A recent medical case from Denmark describes a 39-year-old man who died within 26 hours after drinking water from a coconut that had been sitting unrefrigerated on a kitchen table for more than a month. When he punctured it with a straw, he noticed it tasted strange but kept drinking. Inside, the coconut had become contaminated with Aspergillus flavus, a fungus that produces aflatoxin, one of the most potent natural liver poisons known. Within hours, he developed abdominal pain, vomiting, and liver failure. And despite emergency treatment, he died the next day from drinking coconut water. Food influencer Michael Duarte, known online as Food with Bare Hands, built a massive following by grilling, cooking, and feeding strangers with his bare hands. But on November 8, 2025, his life ended in shocking fashion during a family trip to Texas. Police responded to a disturbance call involving a man reportedly acting erratically with a knife, and Duarte was fatally shot by deputies on the scene. Witnesses later described the moment as chaotic and heartbreaking, with his family present during the incident. The tragedy struck just 3 days after he and his wife celebrated their 9th wedding anniversary. In the immediate aftermath, Duarte's talent agency and family had presented his death via a GoFundMe campaign as a horrible accident, without initially disclosing police involvement. The family has since asked for privacy and support, as funeral arrangements are made and efforts to return his body to California proceed. Duarte was only 36 years old and leaves behind wife Jessica, daughter Oakley, and millions of fans who watched him turn simple meals into moments of kindness and generosity. On November 13, 1982, Duck Koo Kim fought Ray Mancini for the WBA lightweight title in Las Vegas. In the 14th round, Kim was knocked down hard and the fight was stopped. Minutes later, he collapsed from a massive brain hemorrhage, fell into a coma, and died 4 days later at age 27. Then, just a couple months later, in early 1983, Kim's mother died by suicide after traveling to the US and struggling with her son's death. Just a few months after that, referee Richard Green also took his own life after reportedly falling into severe depression, overwhelmed by guilt and public blame for not stopping the fight sooner. The bout became one of the darkest moments in boxing history and directly led to major safety reforms and the elimination of 15-round title fights. In 1977, unemployed Indiana man Tony Karitzis kidnapped mortgage banker Richard Hall after blaming him for the foreclosure of his home. Tony strapped a sawed-off shotgun to Richard's neck, rigged with a dead man trigger so any sudden movement could fire it, and held him hostage inside the Meridian Mortgage Company for nearly 3 days. During the standoff, Richard was forced to walk outside in public and even stand through a live press conference with the gun still pressed against his neck. With negotiations failing and Richard's life constantly at risk, police ended the siege by shooting Tony through a window, killing him instantly as Richard survived unharmed. Scientists in Germany have captured something incredible on camera for the first time ever. They recorded wild rats snatching bats straight out of the air in total darkness, an unbelievable hunting behavior no one had documented before. Since rats have poor eyesight, they rely on their highly sensitive whiskers to detect subtle changes in air pressure and movement, even the faint air currents from a bat's wings. Researchers believe this eerie adaptation is what allows them to hunt in complete darkness, and the finding may also help explain why bat-borne illnesses like coronaviruses are spilling over into rodent populations. Deep in the Guyanese rainforest, Kyatur Falls is nearly 4 times taller than Niagara. Its remote location means few people ever get to see it, and the surrounding cliffs host rare species found nowhere else on Earth. Beautiful, ain't it? NASA's New Horizons spacecraft captured this amazing footage of Pluto during its flyby in 2015, revealing frozen plains, towering ice mountains, and an unexpectedly active surface. The footage offered the first close-up look at Pluto in human history, and completely changed our understanding of the distant dwarf planet. This was the moment the gaming world lost an all-time legend. On December 21st, 2025, Vince Zampella, the 55-year-old co-founder of Respawn Entertainment and Infinity Ward, and one of the most influential figures in modern video games, died in a violent single-car accident on Angeles Crest Highway, a notoriously windy mountain road north of Los Angeles. Driving a 2026 Ferrari 296 GTS, the car veered off the scenic roadway just after exiting a tunnel, slammed into a concrete barrier, and erupted into flames, trapping Zampella in the burning wreckage as he was pronounced dead at the scene. A passenger was also ejected from the vehicle and later died at the hospital, their identity not yet released. The California Highway Patrol said the vehicle left the roadway for unknown reasons, and authorities have not yet disclosed whether speed, mechanical failure, or other factors played a role. Zampella's death comes just days before Christmas, shocking the gaming world and leaving his 3 children and ex-wife grieving, while studios across the industry are mourning the loss of a creative force whose work shaped franchises like Call of Duty, Titanfall, Apex Legends, and Battlefield. On July 5, 2011, 37-year-old Kelly Thomas, a homeless man with schizophrenia, was beaten, pinned down, and repeatedly tased by Fullerton police during a violent encounter captured on audio and surveillance footage. Officers had responded to a call about someone allegedly breaking into cars, and when they found Thomas rummaging through trash near a bus depot, they claimed he became uncooperative during questioning, a claim later disputed by witnesses and contradicted by portions of the footage. As officers piled on top of him, Thomas screamed for his father, begged them to stop, and cried out that he was being killed. Prosecutors later noted he said, "Dad, help me," 31 times, "Help me, God," 26 times, and "Okay" or "I'm sorry" over and over as he slipped into unconsciousness. He arrived at the hospital in a coma with severe head trauma, multiple broken bones in his face, irreversible brain swelling, and died 5 days later. 2 officers were charged, including one for second-degree murder, but both of them walked free after the case collapsed in court. This man swore he discovered the secrets of the pyramids and then built something that shouldn't be possible. Coral Castle in Homestead, Florida is a massive stone structure built single-handedly by Latvian immigrant Edward Leeds Skalman between 1923 and 1951, using more than 1,100 tons or 2.5 million pounds of oolitic limestone. Ed stood barely 5 feet tall and weighed about 100 pounds, but managed to carve, lift, and position multi-ton blocks entirely on his own, often at night and without witnesses, sparking decades of speculation about how he moved such massive stones without any machinery. Visitors swear the site feels engineered with impossible precision. One of its stone gates, weighing over 8 tons, can spin freely with the push of a finger. Ed always claimed he had discovered the secrets of the pyramids, but never explained his methods, leaving behind perfectly balanced stone doors, astronomically aligned carvings, and walls heavier than cars. Coral Castle remains one of America's most mysterious handmade monuments, built out of obsessive heartbreak after Ed's fiancée canceled their wedding just a day before the ceremony. Steve Buscemi was nearly killed in 2001 when he stepped in to break up a bar fight in North Carolina and was suddenly ambushed by a knife-wielding attacker. He was stabbed multiple times in the face, throat, and arm, suffering deep wounds from a completely unprovoked assault. Vince Vaughn also got involved in the fight and was arrested during the chaos but wasn't charged. The man who stabbed Buscemi was later charged with assault and intent to kill. Just a few months later, when the 9/11 attacks hit his home city, Buscemi quietly returned to the FDNY firehouse where he once served as a firefighter in the 1980s. He worked 12-hour shifts digging through rubble alongside first responders, refusing interviews, taking no photos, and asking not to be recognized. In 2018, 16-year-old Carly Goose came home terrified after what her family described as a bad reaction to smoking weed at a party. She spent the night completely panicked, paranoid, and unable to sleep. Then sometime before sunrise, she quietly slipped out of her house without her phone, shoes, or glasses. Neighbors reported seeing her alongside a highway at dawn, disoriented and staring straight ahead. But by the time deputies searched the area, she was gone. Despite years of searches, shifting accounts about her final hours, and nationwide attention on the case, Carly Goose has never been found.